The
What?
devil. Not knowing is offense against God.
What? Blood West is a first-person, stealth shooter, horror-adjacent game with light RPG mechanics released by Polish developer Hyperstrange. Blood West was initially released into early access on February 10th, 2022, and received its full release on December 5th, 2023. The Steam page describes it as an immersive first-person shooter where Weird West meets eldritch horror, taking inspiration from such games as Thief, Stalker, and Hunt Showdown. Now all that sounds good so far, but will we strike gold in this accursed land? Let's find out. Our story starts off with, does he have a name? I'm just gonna call him Seymour. Seymour is dead, at least he is when we first meet him, and is on his way to becoming premium bird food. A friendly native shaman cues us in on the local goings-ons through his monologues. A darkness has crept over the land, and most things that should be dead ain't staying that way. And that's just to start. There's a whole slew of ghoulies and ghosties roaming the land, causing a ruckus, and that's about to become our problem, specifically. We wake up, freshly dead, and meet Gianni.
It worked, and he is even in one piece.
Who wants us to feed him, but he doesn't want blood, he wants gold.
This item you have here, give it to us.
The more gold we bring him, the more he can sniff out the evil corrupting this place. So, we get to work. Gianni gives us a hint that points us in the direction of a piece of cursed gold, and we go there, we find the gold, and bring it back. Repeat this process until there's nothing left. We can also do a side quest for old Jim, and we can take in some local color. There's a slew of locations around the Badlands we can visit, like a farm, a mine, a fort. We can even stop by the old native burial grounds and appreciate the local wildlife. You know what? Actually, on second thought, that actually might be a bet! Once we get all the gold, Gianni will tell us where to find the roots of evil corrupting this place, and we can go kill it. This seems about as good a place as any to drop a spoiler warning. So, if you don't want to know what the rest of the story of this game looks like, you can go to here. They gone yet? Alright. So it looks like Blood West is trying to live up to its ImSim name through its boss fights. They're not very good. We can make the fight a little easier by finding all of the cursed gold hidden throughout the Badlands, but it's still a bad fight. After we make kindling of the roots of evil, we get treated to a cutscene.
Or a bet with the devil.
What?
Not knowing is offense against God.
What?
And by God's permission,
Is he speaking a
he was
different
the
language?
devil's plaything until the devil
What?
is done with him. Job.
This man just doesn't smoke, he chews the damn filters. I've rewatched this cutscene multiple times and I'm still not sure what the hell he's saying. We wake up to Gianni again, and get to meet our first new face. Her name is Annabelle, and she isn't very happy to see us.
I will give you one and only one chance. Waste it at your own risk.
So we offer to help her out to win her trust. She wants us to go find a priest and some kid. The priest is somewhere in the fort to the east, and the kid in the sawmill to the northwest. The fort is just a stone's throw away from the hideout, so we'll hit that first. We're greeted by some ghoulies new to the area, like these Twiggy boys, undead alligators, and riflemen. We get a doohickey, and continue to sneak and stab our way through the fort. The priest is in the tower.
God.
He says he can't, or won't, leave the fort until he gets his hands on the doohickey. At least I think he does. I still can't understand what he's saying. And this game is trying really hard not to show the characters' mouths moving. So he wants the doohickey, and we've already found it. He says he'll head back to camp, and now it's time to find that funny-looking kid. We find that there are even more ghoulies in the swamp, like these cultists that throw leeches, these extra chunky buckethead boys. And the
Nightmare does.
after some time at the sawmill and more whiffed tomahawk throws than I'd like to admit. We find the funny-looking kid. She refuses to go back to the hideout until we find her doll. The doll is in the next room. Get it? Got it? Good. Go back to Gianni. Now we've gained Annabelle's trust, we can ask if she's seen anything particularly spooky happening around here. She tells us to go up top and talk to the tree man. I don't see any... Jesus! He tells us to go find a being much like ourselves that's been scattered across the land. We tell Gianni, and he says he's picked up the scent of what we're looking for.
This undead was hacked into pieces. That would explain why they feel so scattered.
The preacher also asks us to look for an elixir that's said to heal any ailment. I assume he means lozenges, but we'll keep an eye out for him. Alright, first up, let's get that elixir. Getting it isn't too hard, but it's surrounded by some of the worst enemies in the game. Imagine a lost soul, except the weird field of view makes them a bitch to hit, and they can no-clip through walls, and they have more health than they have any right to have. Now, silver bullets may trivialize them, but they're still a goddamn cancer, and I can't abide by that. They're also being flanked by a couple of ghostly gunslingers. With that ordeal out of the way, we can turn in our find. Looks like we can choose who to give the vial to, either Anne or the old preacher. I'm gonna go with Anne, because at least I can understand what the hell she's saying.
Don't tell me you've actually found it. Thank you so much. Wait, it's liquid? Huh. Somehow it never occurred to me that it may be a potion. Well, I'll manage somehow. Thanks again.
We also find a bunch of diary entries later stating that the preacher's kind of a prick. So after we give Anne the elixir, the old preacher wanders off and supposedly dies of cringe or whatever, but nothing of value was lost. Now we can start to build back our busted bandito. The first place is the alligator farm, but when we bring the piece back to Gianni,
Wait, did you feel that? Something's moving.
something wakes up.
Something big.
Luckily, first impressions don't really measure up to shit, because all this big bastard does is walk around in circles around the hill. He's more of an inconvenience than anything. Now we can make our way to the town graveyard. The coffin we need to bust open is locked, and the only person with a key is some riverboat captain. Luckily, there's a riverboat nearby. We find our boy, get our key, get the piece. What's next? Ugh, cultist caves. We spend a lot of time in anthill-like tunnels in this game, which is a situation I'd rather not be in, unless I'm playing Arks. But while down here, I find something wonderful. A special tomahawk that materializes back in the hands after a few seconds. This right here, this is the first time the gameplay actually started to click with me.
Right on the mark.
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be a lasting sensation, but more on that later. We get our final piece and head back to Gianni. It's time to raise up our dead man and see what he's got for us. We do the ritual, and he tells us that he needs a handful of items taken from the local critters, and a flower. Ugh. Let me break down why this is a pain in the ass. What I've been doing is sneaking and stabbing and looting while trying to finish my objectives. During this, you tend to accumulate a lot of items dropped by the local ghoulies. Usually I end up filling my inventory. Sometimes I pick up so many items that I have to head back early just to sell it all. So, I had just sold all of the items I needed right before taking the quest. I could buy them back, but I like my money. And honestly, the items aren't all that hard to find. It's just another tedious fetch quest.
Hunt will begin very soon. You want to take a few steps back? This rite can be quite tricky. While we have done the vast majority of work back then. Oh, this felt good. While you were busy, I took my time to place some traps on the giant's path. Shoot them and fire up the flames. Fire will hurt the giant.
Okay, now I can fight the giant. Mr. Bones over here has placed some traps in the giant's path. That should help us kill it. Bullshit! In hindsight, I should have used the incendiary rounds, but when he said he laid traps in front of the beast, I assume these had some sort of explosives tucked away inside them and weren't just kindling. This is it. I guess it's like fighting a serious Sam boss with scoliosis while on Ambien. And at any time I can just duck back inside and heal up. And even so, these tentacles don't do much damage. I'm gonna save you some time and fast forward through this. So with the giant dead and this area purged of evil, we follow Mr. Bones. Somewhere. I guess we're friends now? We fall off a cliff and die, and apparently this is a big enough deal to where Mr. Bones wants to make a spirit totem to summon Gianni back, because he doesn't want to have to put us back together again, which is, like, rude. I mean, I put his ass back together and he was quartered and scattered halfway across the damn county. Ungrateful, Steven Tyler-looking zombie ass. With a new land means new foes. And first up we have... well, that wasn't so bad. Well, fuck you too. We also get some stinky boys, boo hags. Annabelle also decides to pay us a visit. Not for very long. It's not much, but I'm glad to know her and the funny-looking kid are doing alright. Our quest leads us, where else but, underground. We get a trinket and head back to Bonesy. He says he's seen a light out in the canyon, and we have to go investigate it. Maybe whoever's out there will help us summon Gianni. So we make our way to... You're new. Oh, I don't like that one bit. After many attempts, we make it to the light and find a dentist, a doctor. He has yet another fetch quest for us. I get all the stuff we need, except for the demon skin. I don't know which enemy drops demon skin. They all look pretty demonic to me in the first place. Maybe this guy? Christ, it is a whole ordeal with this man. Not a demon, a werebear. Either way.
I take his heart.
Now that only leaves these horrible bug-looking things. Ugh. Well, that was it. So, I get the skin, finish the quest. Now we can descend into what has thus far been the biggest ordeal this game has thrown at me. I feel so conflicted because while I hate so much of this descent was one of the most genuinely tense parts of the game, and I had to spam melee staggers to get through it. Unfortunately, even Sting couldn't light my way through this horror show. Getting down to the bottom of the chasm only raises more questions. Like, what the hell is this thing? Did it fall down here, or was it unearthed? Either way, I grab its whack-ass crystal, a repeating shotgun, and get the fuck out of Dodge. We return to Bones, and...
I was about to go and find you. A woman in need arrived at our place. Try to help her, yeah?
Who the hell are you talking about? There's a boo hag in our camp now, except this one talks.
Hey, handsome. I have it on good authority that you never refuse to help a lady in need. I need your help in getting my garments back. Skin, to be precise.
Oh, you're definitely the dentist. She wants me to find her skin, and the doctor wants us to find his friend. A friend who we've somewhat been introduced to. You see, we've been picking up these various scraps of writings about the game's monsters roaming the lands, and it looks like it was the Doctor's friend who was the man writing them. We find the man, or at least what's left of him, and get the hag's skin. She looks a little different now. There's a joke about makeup or Instagram filters in here somewhere, but I'm not gonna make it. Next, we gotta find these little figurines in the environment, and place them on these animal altars to open the doors of Durin. We put the figures on the altars and head up the mountain. We free Gianni from his whack-ass crystal prison, or whatever. Oh man, Gianni, am I glad to see you. That bone guy I've been hanging out with's just so dry.
Oh, it's you. We expected you, although we never expected in our wildest dreams that our next meeting would take place under such favorable circumstances. Yes, this place is perfect. The veil between our worlds is thinnest here. And this place, meat and bones, perfect building blocks for our new body. You did well, Spark. You just set your whole world on fire.
Gianni, why? Well, looks like we're gonna finish what Gianni started, and that requires us to finish Gianni. Wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Just give me... Okay. So Gianni turns into Audrey too, and we have to shoot him. This is by far the best boss fight the game's thrown at me so far. It's still garbage, but it's leagues better than the other two. Gianni flies around, we dodge his attacks, he lands, and then we whack him for a bit. And he summons one or two demons, which are by far much more threatening than Gianni himself. We beat Gianni, and then are treated to the final cutscene, which honestly is pretty fucking metal.
Will be us, waiting, and you will grovel before us. For we are eternal, and you are ours. For eternity.
Wait a minute, this is a Little Shop of Horrors. The gameplay of Blood West feels confused. That's not to say the gameplay's bad, or that any of its systems are implemented poorly or are broken. They just kinda clash with each other in unflattering ways. To help me explain my thoughts, I've made this little diagram. So to start off, we have slow stealth gameplay and resource management. Both of these things are implemented well. It's fun to sneak around and stab and shoot and loot and such, all good so far. But then we implement the open world design, where we have these big open maps to wander about with a few safe spots scattered here and there. We can travel between these safe spots with some items to rest and regain health, but every time we rest, some of the enemies on the map respawn. Not all the enemies, just seemingly a random bunch of enemies. And the enemies themselves aren't very smart. They don't do much besides walk around in their static patrol routes. Sometimes they notice when creatures around them die, or when the player whiffs a shot near them, but they go back to their static routes pretty quick. They don't really tend to raise an alarm, or even really search for the player all that long. So, despite having personality, the world itself doesn't really have much depth. Finally, we have the RPG elements. Killing enemies grants you experience, and when you level up, you get a few points to buy various perks and stat buffs. There are two glaring problems I find with this system. For one, most of the perk tree is very bland, with most of what there being simple stat buffs and percentage changes. Second, the only way the player gains experience is through killing enemies in combat. Sneaking, finding secrets, completing objectives, none of that gives the player any experience. So, you have a game with stealth-focused gameplay that requires you to kill as many enemies as possible to level up, and you need to kill quite a bit to get the experience to actually level up. So you can kind of see what I'm getting at here. You have the slower stealth game with resource management that requires the player to traverse large open levels with brain-dead enemies that also respawn, and a perk system where the player is only rewarded for killing as many enemies as possible. So if I try and play it like a stealth-focused game, I'm needlessly making things harder for myself, and the lack of depth in the world makes the gameplay feel incredibly monotonous. And if I try to play it like a more shooter RPG, I just end up grinding brain-dead enemies, which also feels monotonous. While the combat is alright, I feel like the game shines when it's played more like an honest-to-God stealth game. Going full combat all the time doesn't really offer the same tension, and while the weapons feel pretty good and sound good, the dumb AI and the lack of variety in the weapons and like the tactics available to the player all get stale pretty quick. The gameplay doesn't have the depth of something like Thief, the world design doesn't really have the personality of something like Stalker, and the RPG aspects are just bland. There are a few other systems in the game that feel strange as well, like the fast travel system. You can travel between safe areas by using one of two items, a bird skull, which transports you to the main safe area, and a chicken head that will teleport you between any previously found safe spot. This feels weird because when you die, you always spawn back at the central hub, not the last bed you rested in. So if you keep dying in the same spot, you have to use the chicken head to teleport you back to the nearest rest area to kind of continue on what you were doing, which feels incredibly clunky and kind of backwards. Like, imagine if every time you died when, like, playing Dark Souls, you spawned back at Firelink Shrine, no matter where you died. It's just weird. The curse system runs into a similar issue as well. When you die, you're given a curse, and these curses act as various debuffs to your character. This is a neat idea, but it's also incredibly easy to avoid, because the traders almost always sell potions that remove the curse, and you can give a gold coin to Gianni for a buff that negates the curse upon your next death. The potions are relatively cheap, and you can find a lot of gold pieces through your playthrough. Both of these systems just feel particularly, like, undercooked, and the traders always having the items you need feels like a band-aid, and a particularly inelegantly placed one at that. Like, it feels like somebody wanted this game to be more punishing, but then they kind of walked it back, and now both of these systems just feel kind of like more of like a nuisance more than anything else. And I want to stress one thing. Despite all the things I've said about the gameplay itself, it isn't bad. It just feels kind of misguided. Like, instead of really focusing hard on the strong suits, it tries to half-ass a bunch of other things that I feel kind of hurt the game overall. The gunplay feels good, for the most part. The FOV being stuck at 85 is questionable. That mixed with the zoom effects and the iron sights, shooting can feel kind of difficult, and I would often get hit by melee attacks that I didn't feel should have landed, but overall the combat and the movement both feel pretty good. There is one last thing I needed to talk about, and it's the absolute lack of interaction with the environment that not just the player has, but also the monsters inhabiting it have. Like, here's an example of what I'm talking about. There was one time I was sneaking around a riverboat filled with enemies, and while looting, I accidentally interacted with a piano and created a bunch of noise. And my immediate thought was, oh shit, they're all gonna hear that. But nothing happened. Enemies might go to inspect a corpse if they hear its death sound, but that's about it. They don't typically alert other enemies in the area. They don't really go into a more alert, like, searching mode. They don't really hunt for the player all that much. The only enemy that even comes close to doing anything interesting like that are those foul dog-looking things. They start eating any corpses they come across, allowing the player to sneak by them, which is a cool idea. That gives the player an interesting way to interact with those enemies, and offers an alternate way of dealing with some situations. But this is the only enemy that does anything like that. There is also a severe lack of enemies doing anything other than executing their mindless patrols. Like, you never come across enemies interacting with each other or the environment in any, like, interesting ways. Like, just have them do anything else, like have them mindlessly droning on a piano in the saloon, or maybe some of the more cognizant enemies could, like, chat or at least, like, acknowledge each other in some way. maybe have enemies change up their patrol routes after a death or a rest, or have certain bands of monsters travel in between hotspots on the map. Like, the world feels so dead and static. And don't give me that they're all zombies, the world is supposed to be dead bullshit, because you know exactly what I mean. Because the world of Blood West doesn't feel dead in a thematic way. It feels dead in a we just placed a bunch of mindless enemy entities in a map kind of way. It feels sterile. And even when the enemies are in pursuit of the player, they don't really do anything to complement each other. They all just kind of run at you. And this hurts the game so much, in my opinion. It actually hurts the game the most, in my opinion. Because despite all my issues with the gameplay or the gunplay or the open world, I could easily see myself returning to this game if I liked being a part of the world it presented to me. And I just don't, because at the end of the day, the world feels sterile and dull. One of the games that Blood West says it takes inspiration from is Stalker. And honestly, I'm kind of scratching my head trying to figure out where that inspiration manifested itself. You see, one of the things I feel when I play a game like Stalker is that every time I play it, I get new stories. I see some interaction between the various entities of the zone, whether they be stalkers or bandits or mutants. And while it may be janky and downright broken in a lot of places, it leaves a lasting impression because no two playthroughs ever really feel the same. And this is a quality that I feel Blood West utterly lacks, despite having all the necessary pieces to do so. Like, just off the top of my head, you could do something simple, like maybe have the dog enemies and the zombie enemies not like each other. Like, packs of dogs just roam around the map, and maybe zombies randomly dig themselves out of the ground, and occasionally they fight each other. Or maybe the buccaneer guys and the rifleman guys don't like each other. Or maybe they could at least, like, acknowledge each other when walking around and doing their patrol routes. Like, you know, maybe sometimes, randomly, some various enemies will just start gunfights, and then I can draw other enemies near. Like, just have little things happening in the map to make it seem more, like, alive, to make it more interesting to explore. Like, maybe you could have the prodigal daughters playing the piano in the saloon, or maybe, like, have the skin collectors actually tan corpses and, like, kind of interact with stuff in their environment, instead of just, like, walking in circles like they normally do. Like, come on, like, the hides are right there, just interact with them, fuck. All the necessary pieces are here, they're just not being used as well as they could be, or really at all for that matter. Make the world feel like an actual world, because right now it just feels like a sandbox with multiplayer bots. And honestly, I don't think the gameplay is strong enough to make up for that. I can overlook clunky game design, I can enjoy a game despite having jank. Hell, most of the games I love are janky, unfinished messes, but I can't overlook a game for feeling dead and hollow. And unfortunately, that's what Blood West felt like to me. Also, calling your game immersive when you can't even see your own legs. Shame on you. Despite a funky field of view and a weird draw distance, in terms of visuals, Blood West fucking kills it. It is an absolute treat to look at. It occupies that chunky, low-poly space where it doesn't look like it's trying to emulate games of old, but instead is just doing its own thing with the style. All the enemy designs are bloody fantastic and all have tons of personality, whether they be the zombies, the ghosts, the creatures from beyond the veil, or a healthy assortment of feral ghoulies. Although some designs do have more personality than others. I personally love the designs of the zombies that crawled out of the ground and weren't completely able to get out of their coffins. They just look so goofy. I love these dorks. Also, the Wendigos look cool as hell. I love a good Wendigo design. And all the animation work is done wonderfully as well, whether it be the player's animations or the enemy's movement and attack animations. Although I do wish enemies had a bit more to do, but I already spoke on that. The environments are nice as well, all very moody and atmospheric, although I do wish there was a little more in terms of ambient sound, like far-off rolling thunder or wind blowing through the trees, maybe distant gunshots and howls. Speaking of sound design, This is another place where Blood West absolutely kills it, like to an actual surprising degree. All the enemies have distinct and recognizable sounds, and the spatial audio is really well done. It's damn impressive to be sneaking around and to be able to distinctly tell where enemies are either above or below you and which enemies those are just based on sound alone. Last thing I'll bring up is the voice acting. The voice acting is another aspect that is surprisingly done well, and I don't mean that in a facetious way. Considering how small the team is that made the game, it's extremely impressive how outstanding the presentation can be in almost every aspect. The game's voice cast is no different. We of course have Gianni, who is wonderful, and as a downright unexpected treat we have Stephen Russell. Yeah, Mr. Garrett himself voicing the player character. The dialogue might be generic, but he absolutely kills it with the delivery. And while most of the rest of the cast maybe only have 1 or 2 credits on their IMDb pages, they still do a bang-up job. Blood West has a beautiful presentation, and it has everything it needs and more to be an interesting, fun, and memorable gem of a game. But sadly, it fails to do that. Blood West doesn't capture any of the personality or charm of the games it's trying to emulate, and unfortunately, that lack of charm and personality within its world wounds the experience more than any clunky game mechanics or janky gameplay ever could. There, that's the TLDR. I really wanted to like Blood West, and honestly, there are a lot of things that I do really like about it, which makes my feelings on it all the more frustrating. It's not often I come across a game with so many impeccably good qualities, but is ruined by one unignorable characteristic that just goes and ruins the whole thing. The game has all the familiar trimmings of a game I should love and an A+ presentation to boot, but the mundanity of actually being in the game's world makes it feel overall bland and unmemorable. Also, as a last-minute pondering, I find it kind of strange that there's no way to backtrack to earlier levels you've beaten, and find it especially odd that there's no New Game Plus or Rearrange mode after you complete the story. That just seems kind of like a no-brainer. It kills me to give this game such a harsh review. From the description, it looked like somebody said, let's take the aesthetics of Hunt Showdown and the gameplay of Thief and make a game, which is a fantastic idea. Hell, taking the aesthetics of Hunt and making any type of game would be a good idea. Western horror is so shamefully underutilized. The only games that come to mind that use that are Undead Nightmare and Dark Watch? Ugh. I've had my eye on Blood West since early access, and bought it as soon as it hit 1.0, and was really excited to play through it. But halfway through, I found myself dreading to have to finish it. I will say I can see why people like this game, and I understand the praise I've seen sung for it, but for me personally, I feel like the game wasted a lot of its potential when it comes to its world building. And for a game like this, I find the world building and the overall feel of the game's world extremely important. Like, you have an impeccably designed world dripping with atmosphere, but put very little into making the player feel like an actual part of it. On top of that, Blood West's gameplay feels like it couldn't really decide if it wanted to be more of a straightforward shooter or something with a little more depth, and as a result, it doesn't really do either of these things particularly well. I am definitely going to be keeping my eye on Hyperstrange, though. I may not have enjoyed Blood West as much as I would have liked, but I'll be damned if the game does not bear the undeniable marks of genuine quality in its visual design, sound design, and voice acting. They are all some seriously impressive stuff, considering how small of a team that was working on this. And while I haven't played it, Postal Brain Damage, from what I hear, is good, and any dev that does right by the Postal franchise does right by me. What are you still doing here? It's the credits. Video's over. Gotta go find something else to watch now. You know, there was a time where I figured I would try and prophetize what video comes next or what I'm gonna work on next, but I have no clue what I'm gonna do next. So I didn't even think about what type of gag I was gonna put at the end of the video here. Wait a minute, okay, I know what I'm gonna do. Holy hell, I am a tired boy today. Alright, until next time, folks. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.